It's Bonnie with So Inspired by Bonnie with another Tuesday's tip. Last week we discussed keeping the bobbins under control so that they didn't come unwound when we were putting them into storage compartments. And I had a lady write in and say she loved the tips that we had, but she wanted to know, how do we keep thread spools from coming unwound when we're sewing with those? How do you keep those straight? So I thought, well, that's a really good idea. Let's go ahead and discuss that and find out what I do to keep my thread under control so that when I put it away for storage, I don't wind up with a big honkin' mess of thread that's just unraveling everywhere. Because as an embroiderer, and I know most of you out there are embroiderers too, you know we wind up with a lot of thread and a lot of different kinds of threads. So we get to see it all, don't we? So anyway, several years ago I used to use Poly X40 for my brand of choice, and it's now called Exquisite. They changed their name, but it's the same thread. And at that time, I found out that if you pulled out the end of the Poly X40 or the Exquisite thread, you got a little area here, a little valley, for lack of a better term, that you could wind your thread around. So I just put my thumb here and I wind my thread around, and then I pop it shut. So a lot of threads come this way, and it got me to thinking, well, I wonder how many other threads are like that I just didn't know I could wind the thread around the base and then shut it and not have the thread come undone. So I kind of pulled, I'm always on the lookout now for that type of spool. Not that I shop for that specifically, but I look for that to be there after I've purchased it. So I went into my stash and I pulled out a bunch of thread, and obviously thread comes in all shapes and sizes, whether it's serger thread, your large cones of thread, your small cones of thread, whether it's just on a tube or what have you. And I started looking at all of them, and what I discovered was quite a few of them actually have a means to pull out the end where you can wind your thread around. This is a spool of sulky. And as you can see, it looks just ordinary. It doesn't look like anything fancy. But if you get your fingernail in that little line there, you can see that it opens up and exposes a little area on either end. It's not just one end that you can open up. Well, if I can get my fingernail in there. And see, it's opened up on both ends, and then this was in there, but all you have to do is get your thumb over the end so you can kind of get it started and wind your thread around it and pop it shut, and it's not going to come undone on you. So that's on the sulky. Rayon is, not rayon, Madeira rayon is exactly the same way. I would imagine their polyester would be the same way, but you'd have to double check. Again, if you look at the end of your spools, you'll see just sort of a little line there. And if you put your fingernail in there and pull, it'll open up, exposing an area where you can wind the thread around, which is really handy. I think it's quite ingenious that these thread companies have thought of this for us. So you can just wind it around and then push it shut, and it's not going to come undone. The Poly X40 I mentioned earlier, that was the first one that I discovered it on because it just, you know, looked a little bigger and it was more exposed. It was more obvious that it was there. Here's another little small spool of Madeira, and it has the ends that you can pop out. I just put my little fingernail in there and it pops open. You can work it around, and again, it's on either end, so it does it for either end. The Aurora Fill doesn't have an end to pop out, but what they do have are little grooves on either end, and you can just get your thumb over the edge to get it started, wind your thread around it, and it's going to stay put. It's not going to come undone on you. So the Aurora Fill is pretty cool too. And here is some Metler. Metler is similar to the Aurora Fill, only it just has a slit or a valley here on one end and not the other. So again, you'd put your thumb over the edge and just start winding it around, and it's going to hold it. So, you know, those are really slick how they work. Now, just because you bought the same brand of thread doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to have the end where you can pull it out on all of them. This is a Robinson Anton, and it's a cotton, and if you look at that, yes, it's a little bit bigger down there, so I push it open on that, and again, it's exposed an end cap where I can wind the thread on the end cap in that little valley and push it shut, and my thread is stored and it won't come undone. This is another spool of Robinson Anton, and there's nothing there to pull. It's just smooth. There's no end cap on that one. So look at all your thread. Just because it's the same brand doesn't necessarily mean they did it the same way. Sometimes brands will change how they do things midstream on us. So always be on the lookout for anything on the end that looks like you could maybe separate it or pull it open, and you can wind your thread around that way. This is a spool of dual duty thread, and dual duty does not have an end cap where you can pull it off. What dual duty does have is a little slit at the top which can hook your thread. So you can wind your thread around. I'm kind of looking down here, and then in that little slit you can slide that thread into that little slit, and if you do that, your thread will not come undone. Now, I've heard some people say, oh, dual duty thread is really bad thread, I don't like it. And I'd be willing to bet I don't have a problem with dual duty thread. It's been really good. My dealer used to buy it all the time. It's what we used all the time to do our demonstrations with when we were demonstrating sewing machines, we used dual duty thread. So I know it's a decent thread. What I think happens with a lot of people is the edge of the spool is not very smooth. It's kind of rough, and it has that slit on the edge. And I think what happens with a lot of people, let me get my spool cap. We discussed spool caps in the very first Tuesday tip I did, but I think this bears repeating just a little bit. I'm not going to go into the full details, but you might want to go back and look at that previous video on spool caps and thread shredding and thread break or needle breaks, things of that nature. This is one of the leading causes, especially on a dual duty or a spool of thread that's like a dual duty. The end is not very smooth. Again, it has that slit. A lot of people will put this spool cap on it because it's the same size, thinking that that will work great. Well, what happens is it's exactly the same size, and when you're sewing, it might shift just a tad, either up or down. And if it shifts just a little bit, it's going to expose that bumpy edge, or worse, it's going to expose, you know, it's kind of like playing Russian roulette. It's going to expose that little slit, and if your thread gets caught in that, it can't feed. It's going to pull back on the needle, and you'll have a needle break. So my advice, if you have a needle break, go ahead and change out the needle, but don't take the thread out before taking a really good look at the thread path and seeing if you can find an area where the thread looks like it got stuck or hung up or twisted around and hung up on. Because a lot of times, I'd say probably 9 times out of 10, the thread got hung up on something, and that's why your needle broke. It's usually a really simple fix. So for the dual duty, I would make sure that I had definitely a spool cap that was big enough to cover all the exposed edges of the end of that spool so that it didn't rub up and have your thread get caught. Okay, I got off onto the farm to market road, but let's get back to our main discussion, which was how do we take care of those spool caps that don't have an end cap? Like this Floriani thread has an end cap. Again, when I put my fingernail in here and pull it, it came into two pieces, and originally I thought I had broken my spool cap, but that's just how it's made. They make theirs to actually come completely apart, which is fine. A lot of times I don't take it completely off, but you can. If you notice on the end of a Floriani thread, it has 3 little notches, and you can actually pull this little end cap off, hook your thread onto one of those little notches, pop that end cap back on, and then you can wind your thread around the spool cap. Now, if you don't want to take the end off of a Floriani thread, you can just leave it on like this, put your fingernail down at the end there so you kind of have something to hold on to, and then wind your thread around that end of the spool cap as well. Either way works on this kind of a spool cap, but if you pull that off on a Floriani thread, I just wanted you to know you didn't break anything. That's how they're made. So everybody has to do their stuff a little bit differently, don't they? Okay, on the big Floriani thread, no spool cap end. I thought that they might have it so you could pull it open and put thread in a little slot down there, but no such luck. It's just a big cone of thread. The same with the serger thread. There's no end cap on there. The Exquisite, which is also previously known again as Poly X40, the large cone didn't have a pull apart area to put the thread. Neither did the King Star large cone that I have, or the Madeira, or a small spool of Marathon thread that I had purchased many years ago. And all of your tube thread, now this is a 12 weight Cotty, all of your tube thread's not going to have an end cap that you can pull open to put your thread in. So what do we do with those? Because these are the problem children. These are the ones that are going to unravel on us because we can't just wind them up. So what I do with these is I'll take vinyl. I'll take a thin, flexible vinyl, and I will cut it down to a size that will work with my spools. So on a big spool, you might take and measure. I would measure a full spool, of course. You don't want to measure a spool of thread that's almost gone, because then it won't fit around your full ones, and you can have it too long, but if it's too short and doesn't wrap all the way around your thread, it's not going to stick. So you won't, it's better to have it a little long than too short. This happens to be about 7 inches around. I measured a fuller spool of the short stuff. Let's get the Robinson Anton. This one has one, but it gives me an idea of what to make for the other one. This one's around 4.5 inches. So I would make them probably about anywhere from 8-9 inches. Maybe on the 4.5 inch, I might make them 6 inches. You know, it's not expensive stuff. So I would use a rotary cutter ordinarily to cut my vinyl. Now, a little bit about the vinyl. There's a lot of different kinds of vinyl out there. I got this colored vinyl at Hancock's years and years ago when they were still in business. I think you can still find different colors of vinyl online. If you do a Google search, you could find color vinyl. This is great for in the hoop projects, like our luggage tags or our luggage handle wraps. I think it's a lot of fun to use the color vinyl for something like that. I don't use it on my thread because it changes the color of my thread, and I want to be able to see what color my thread is. They also have a satin finish kind of clear vinyl. I would not recommend using the satin finish clear vinyl because it has a little bit of a texture to it and it's not going to stick to itself. So I would stay away from those two types of vinyl. What I did find years ago, I was able to find it at Walmart, at I don't know about Hobby Lobby, but Walmart, Joann's, Hancocks used to carry it, but we don't have Hancocks anymore. So I would probably do a little Google search online and find the clear vinyl in a lightweight so that it would stick to itself. And this comes on a roll, and it came 45 inches wide. A little teeny bit goes a long way. You only need it about an inch wide. You don't need different varying widths for the different sizes of spools. 1 inch is going to work equally well, I have found, on the large spools as it does on the small. I used to cut them different sizes. That's not necessary. You just need a nice, you need it long enough so it'll wrap all the way around and stick to itself. And you need it so that it's about an inch wide or so. I like the inch wide. And so I'll take out my trusty little 6-inch ruler. If you don't have one of these little 6-inch rulers, go get one. Excuse me. They are so handy. I use mine all the time. Excuse me. So I would ordinarily cut with a rotary cutter to get a nice straight edge. But just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to eyeball it here. And I'm going to use my little 6-inch ruler. Excuse me, I should have gotten myself a glass of water. And cut it about 8 inches or so. And then I'm going to take my thread, and I'm going to take my little strip of vinyl, and I'm going to wrap it around where the loose end of thread is, and there it is. It's nice and sturdy. It's not going to shake and come undone. So it's really handy. This little strip of vinyl is going to work on a small spool. It'll also work on a large spool. So, and it'll last forever. I've had these for years, and they've lasted forever. You can use them over and over and over again. If they do get dusty or dirty and they lose some of their stickiness, you can just wipe them clean and they'll be as good as new. So easy peasy. Now, a really super duper easy way that I found is also Hugo's Amazing Tape. That's spelled H-U-G-O, Hugo's Amazing Tape. And it comes on rolls in various widths. It comes in a 1 inch, or I think they call it 7/8 inch, and then one that's narrower. I prefer the 7/8 or 1 inch width on the Hugo's tape, and then you just cut it to the length that you desire, you know, 8 inches, 8 or 9 inches, and you're good to go. You don't have to store a big wad of vinyl if you don't want to. It's a little more expensive to have it this way on a roll. I will tell you that, but you have less work involved in just cutting off the length that you need. Now, one thing that I do to help keep myself organized when I'm embroidering is I will put all my thread in order on the right side of my machine when I'm getting ready to embroider, so that they're in the order I need. So early on, I made mistakes like I would accidentally not do it that way, and I would wind up with green hair or, you know, purple eyes or something that wasn't right. So I have learned that works best for me is to line up my thread to the right of my machine in the order that I'm going to do the embroidery. Then I'll sew that in, you know, color, and as it comes off, I'll put it on the left side. Well, when it's sewing the next color, I take my thread and I either wind it up with the clear vinyl or the Hugo's Amazing Tape, or wind it back up onto the little end of the spool cap that's already on the thread of spool of thread. So whatever method works for that particular brand or thread that I'm using is what I will wind it up so it's ready to be put away as I go. I find it's easier to kind of keep up with things as I go, as opposed to trying to clean a mess several days later. I'll have a much bigger mess, and a lot of times I don't feel like getting back to it because it is such a mess. So you're probably like me too. The longer you put it off, the harder it seems to be to get it straightened up. So anyway, I'm going to refresh my computer here and see if we have any questions that have not been addressed with this. So bear with me as I check my computer here. I would love to be able to read straight off of the telephone, but my mature eyes just don't allow me to do that anymore. I can't see that well. So we do have a couple of comments here. I'll see if I can get them open up for me. Someone is saying no volume. All I can say is double check to make sure that the volume control is up on your computer. Sometimes I'll have someone accidentally bump my volume control and it's off. So double check your computer, make sure the volume is on. It looks like there's no questions. It looks like a few of you haven't noticed this before on the end of your spools. So I hope you start looking at the end of the spools to make sure that you don't have an area that you can just wind up right there. No extra products needed at all. Super easy. So I hope you join our mailing list. We have free designs offered sometimes. The specials or new releases are all on our newsletter. So be sure to go to www.soinspiredbybonnie.com to sign up for our newsletter. And until next Tuesday at 11 o'clock Central, bye-bye for now.